So we went from 420 condos to 738 rental apartments, but it was exactly the same building.
Wow.
The building didn't change at all.
Was it hard to resubmit plans to get approval based on layout?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
You know, one thing so well, you just change a few lines on a drawer. We took $6 million worth of plans, ripped them up, threw them in the garbage, and
Created $6 million more.
started again.
All right, so this is a special episode of the Deal Ranch podcast for me. This is also our first episode with a repeat company. So this time last year, we had David Becker on, Francis Greenburger, Chairman and CEO of Time Equities. Francis, this is special for me because your book, I think, was foundational in my life, and it's one of my favorite real estate books. But as an intro on you, you're the founder and chairman of a pretty big, to say the least, real estate company, global, about 6 million plus in assets. You also pioneered the co-op conversions in New York City and I think for broader of America, but in the author of one of my favorite books. So thank you for having me in your office. I'm excited to talk about a couple of your famous projects here today.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here, and thank you for your interest.
Absolutely. So I want to talk about 50 West, which I believe we can see from here when I was gazing out the window.
Yes, you can.
And I walked down, or I took the train down last night to look at it for the first time too. And then we're going to talk about 1000M, which is your newest skyscraper in Chicago. Talk about the deal stories and intricacies behind those two, and maybe wrap with another story. But as an intro, can you give an intro on yourself in a condensed version? I know there's a lot to it, but intro on yourself in your role at Time Equities now, where you are today.
All right. Well, you know, I think my role as chairman and CEO probably covers a lot of the traditional territory. Sort of I set policy, but I stay closer to the ground on key transactions. I'm very involved in design. Work very closely with our director of development on new projects. We both bring our respective design aesthetic into play and into interactions with the professionals, with the architects and other designers. But my other hat is that I'm also effectively the CIO, Chief Investment Officer for the company. So I'm very involved in reviewing the underwritings that our asset acquisition and asset management teams put forth on new projects or with respect to dispositions, are all critical decisions in terms of the portfolio.
For those that didn't listen to the first episode with David, which was fantastic, but could you give an overview of what Time Equities is? Because it'll be a good frame for the conversation. Maybe a good, just broad overview of the portfolio size and maybe asset classes too.
So we're a national and international real estate investment company. We have assets in 37 U.S. states and 6 different countries, 6 or 7. We just sold a property in Scotland, so we don't currently have one
Down to
there.
6, yeah.
And the company itself is very much sort of the old style, but new style, sort of full service real estate investment company, in that we provide the full spectrum of services. We have an in-house legal team, probably have 10 lawyers here. We have a very large accounting staff. We prepare our own tax returns.
Yep.
We don't obviously certify our own financial statements, but we prepare them. They're number of auditors on staff. We have our own marketing groups. We have our own leasing groups.
Got a big equity division now.
Big equity division, mortgage finance division. So really, the full spectrum of services that we need. We do occasionally work with third-party professionals where they have specialized expertise or can show our internal people how to do something better than maybe their own experience brings them. But it's a wide group. We're blessed by having a lot of people here who, even though some of them are still relatively young, the 40-year-olds have spent the last 15 plus years of their careers here, or some of them 20 years. And we have a senior group that's, we just have one person retiring who's been here 39 years. And there are a number of people who are in that 30 to 40 year group. So it's a very close-knit, cohesive group, but substantial. I think we have over 160 people right here on our platform in New York, and of course we have another
People everywhere.
1,000 people working in the buildings and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. I'm excited for our conversation, and I think anyone that hasn't read the book certainly should. But we've met before. We sat down last time.
Sure.
You told me a lot of really neat stories. But unfortunately, we won't go into a ton of the past, even though there's a lot with the co-op time period that would be great to hear about. Maybe we can wrap with it. But I know we want to focus our time on 50 West to paint the picture for your recent project, 1000M. One thing I appreciate about the book and the way you tell stories is you really tell it through the lens of the entrepreneur, which I think really encompasses the amount of pain and anxiety that goes into each project and kind of the more raw version for each project. So do we want to transition to 50 West? Talk about, if you could start with the acquisition, because I believe it was maybe the Crystal Building was one of the three that you acquired, and then now all the way to this luxury 64-story.
That's a very long story, and I don't think we'll have full time for it. But
Yeah.
I bought the building. It was one of my first larger transactions in 1982, it was a complicated purchaser because the seller had agreed to sell it to somebody else. Even though I had offered the same price. And I didn't really know why he chose this other buyer. But it so happened that a friend of mine was very close to one of his major clients. And she was a bit of a dominant figure, to say the least. And she called him up at 5 in the morning, because that was her way, and said, "You will sell the building to Greenburger instead of the other person." So that was the beginning, and in the end, that's what happened. I mean, there's a whole story there. But for the first 25 years, from 1982 to really 2000, early 2000, 2005, we operated it as a loft office building. Originally, it was a printing building in that a lot of the people on Wall Street needed things printed overnight, and there were, but eventually that kind of phased out, and it evolved into more office designers, things like that, different professionals. A few people started living in the building in the 90s, in addition to working there, so there were what we called was a work-live environment. But around 2005, these were old buildings. They were, I don't know exactly how old, but probably 75 years old at that time, or maybe 100, I don't know. And we recognized that either we were going to have to do a major gut renovation of these, or we should tear it down and build something new. And so we made the decision to build something new. We developed plans for it, and actually started a foundation. And then, of course, 2008 world financial collapse. and it was time to choose a different path. And the path that we chose was to halt construction on the foundation and wait until the market strengthened, which took 3-4 years from the time of the collapse. And then conditions seemed right again, and we started up.
This episode of the Deal Ranch podcast is brought to you by Hux Curry Advisors. Hux Curry Advisors is the complete real estate consulting and advisory firm in the Myrtle Beach market, providing the services needed for any stage of your project, whether it's strategic planning, site selection, due diligence, project management, land planning, or anything in between. If you're an institutional investor looking to expand with a strategy, a small business transitioning from renting to real estate ownership, a landowner seeking maximum return, or a national retailer searching for a key location in this top growth market, reach out to Hux Curry Advisors for all real estate consulting needs in the Myrtle Beach MSA. To learn more about Hux Curry or connect with the team, go to huxcurryadvisors.com by clicking the link in the show notes. So when you restarted the construction process, I think maybe there's a construction loan in 2012, somewhere around there, maybe resumed? Okay. What was in your eyes, the vision for that project? Like, as far as due diligence, how did you perceive the need or desire for this type of luxury condo product down near Wall Street?
Well, it was like it always is. It was a head scratch. We noticed that across the street from the building was a large development called Battery Park City, and pricing in Battery Park City was $1,200 or $1,300 a square foot for the buildings that were condos. They were called condos, but this was a sleight of hand by our government. They were actually built on a land lease.
Wow.
And in New York State, if you're anybody but the government and you build on a land lease, you have to call it a land lease co-op.
But they didn't have
But
to.
if you're the government, you get to call it a condo, which of course it wasn't, but according to New York State it was.
Funny how that works.
Yeah, funny how that works. But it was very important that what we figured out when you really got into the subtlety of it was that the land lease payments represented another $300, let's say, in value. So on a more equitable comp basis, we were really up close to $1,600, and that was kind of our bet going in. We needed to get to that pricing in order to have a decent margin and make the project viable. And if you looked at it superficially, you'd say, well, it's not $1,300, you can't.
Of course.
But that wasn't the case when you really went into the detail. And the other thing that our development department had carefully charted was the recovery after 2008. And like so many low times, what happens is, of course, there's no new inventory being built.
That's a good point.
So everybody's kind of frozen, and demand starts to rebuild, and whatever surplus supply there was at the beginning of the crisis gets absorbed, and then suddenly you have a new crisis. There's a shortage of supply, right. And we could see those lines on our charts crossing in 2012. So it became a very pivotal time, and we were able to bring all of this data to our bankers and convince them that this was an opportune moment, and then we started up again. You know.
Wow. What was it looks good on paper, the pro forma looks good, but executing obviously is the next part in the process. So what was the sales and marketing process of that? I don't know what the strategy was, but what was the strategy, and how early on did it take where you're like, okay, these are being absorbed, or like we're finally getting forward here?
So we started really right off the bat once we decided to move forward. We began pre-sales, and we found a very nice office that was half a block away from the site that had the same view that people from the apartments,
Wow.
from the new building would have. And that was really critical, and it's one of the things you do when you're building a project. Locating a sales office can often be critical in order to deliver the experience that you're trying to sell on a pre-construction basis. So we set up a great sales office, and of course you amenitize, you put in all the sort of finishes, and you make it as close to the experience that people might have in the building, so they get the feeling for it. And you begin trying to convince people to agree to buy apartments pre-construction, and then later during construction, because obviously you'd like to have as many units sold when you finally complete the building. And so that went well, and we were our sales were very strong.
Wow.
And so much so that we were able to increase prices
Through the sales cycle.
during the sales cycle, which is a good thing because what motivates people sometimes when they were in this yesterday looking at a plan, and we're legitimately a month later or 2 months later, prices change.
Right.
And they see that sales are occurring, so they know the people who got in the beginning made a good deal. So I don't know how many price changes we had during the sales period over 18 months or whatever it was, but we had quite a number of them that were legitimate because we kept selling at those higher prices and sort of building the momentum.
For those pre-sales, you were taking 10% deposits or larger?
Yeah,
okay.
10%.
What was the part in the project where if you read the book, it's well documented in there, but the amount of pain and holding on to that $500 million project for a long time, paying interest over all those years. At what point did you feel like, okay, we're breathing again? Like, was it during the pre-sales or was it until they actually closed and construction was complete? Where did you feel like, all right, hey, there might be some light here?
Well, of course, when that interim period between 2008 and 2012, we still had a loan on part of the land value and on the foundation and all the plans and that had gone into it. And I forget the amount of that loan exactly, but it was probably 30 million, 40 million. It wasn't a nickel. Yeah. And we're carrying that at, whatever the interest rate was at the time, plus the taxes. We were shelling out $3-4 million a year while we were staring at an empty mud hole.
Yeah. It's expensive mud puddle. Yeah.
Mud hole, which, insult to injury, we even had to have guards, because it's the city requirement, making sure that nobody fell in the mud hole.
Oh,
I mean, it was all fenced in, of
Right,
course, and
yeah.
protected, but, the city has tough regulations about unbuilt sites. Anyway, so once we got into construction mode, that was a relief, because rather than it coming out of my pocket, it was coming out of the development budget that was built. It was built in to the reserves. So that was a sense of relief. But of course, if we weren't going to sell the project successfully, the banks would be knocking heavily at my door, and the kind of loan that we had required personal responsibility. So they would be knocking very loudly.
Yeah.
So the next sense of relief, of course, was when we started making those sales. And then also as part of our capital stack, we had some very pretty expensive preferred equity from a major hedge fund. And so I was very much looking forward to the day when we would be able to pay them back, which of course didn't happen until the building was finished and we started closing, but we had ranked up enough sales to pay off first the first mortgage and then that preferred equity loan.
How long did it take? What was the sellout process? Like when I guess when was it set up on like a takedown schedule where like the debt was going to be done after 70% of the units, or how did sales take care of
the
debt and
the
preferred
debt,
equity?
as I recall, on that project, the numbers are. I think the debt represented about 60% of the cost,
Okay.
or maybe 50 or 60, I can't remember.
Mm-hmm.
And then the preferred equity probably brought it up into the 70s,
Got it.
and the rest was our own equity. But that was of the cost. Obviously, you're trying to sell for more than your
that.
cost. So probably we paid off the first mortgage with 40% of the sales, or
Okay, wow.
something like that, 40 or 45%, and then another X percent to get the preferred paid off, and we ended up selling about 70% of the building, and then the market slowed. And we had always had a plan that we were going to hold on to a certain number of units, because if you rent units for at least 2 years and then sell them, you get a different tax treatment than if you sell them right away. In one case, it's capital gain. In the other case, it's regular income. So that was a significant difference for us. We probably would have originally sold it up to, maybe we would have held the last 20 or 25% of the units. But somehow the market started losing steam, and we ended up at about 70. And so we just decided, okay, we'll hold there.
Okay.
And we decided to rent the units, which we did. And the rental market was, even though the condo market was running out of steam, the rental market was red hot.
Wow.
And so we got extraordinary rents for the apartments in the building, probably ranging from, for a small one bedroom, maybe $7,500 a month, all the way up to, I think the penthouse rented for $60,000 a month.
Wow.
And everything in between.
Okay.
So, and essentially, for what we've kept that inventory of apartments. We sell them occasionally when sometimes somebody we rented to wants to buy one.
Sure.
We haven't been very aggressive about our sales program. We've basically been taking the rental income, and those rents have gone up significantly since the beginning. And so we sell an apartment when there's somebody wants it. But mostly we've been happy to rent them.
Wow. What year was that where that plan changed, where you hit 70% and then started to get into the rental?
Gosh. I'm thinking 2017.
Okay.
Something like that.
The reason I ask, I think this can be a good transition point to 1000M, which I think you acquired the site in 2016. So
Yep.
maybe somewhere around there. So to wrap on 50 West as a precursor, having sweat that deal out for considerable amount of time, but also having a lifelong relationships in condos and co-ops, but this being a new product for you, being this luxury skyscraper, what were your takeaways, or where was your appetite to do something like this again as you make it through some of those sales?
Well, as I think about takeaways, one of the takeaways are when you take on these projects, you have to be flexible and be prepared to adjust your business plan constantly as the environment changes. These plans take 5 years is short, 10
That's
years
right.
is not unusual, and a lot changes, good and bad. And if you're going to survive in this business, you have to adjust to those changes,
Right.
particularly the negative ones. The positive ones, you can
Easy
just
to adjust
smile
to,
and, I always say, if it's bad news, call me 24/7. If it's good news, you can send it by snail mail.
I like that.
And so being flexible is really important.
Yeah.
And that also informs the path with 1000M later on. Was I looking for a project? Not really.
Okay.
We did do another project in New York following 50 West. It was a small project, but a important historical.
Which was that?
It was called Prince. It was a historic project at Prince Street
Okay.
and Mott, between Mott and Mulberry, if you know what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Most people who come to New York know where St. Patrick's Cathedral is,
Right.
or think they know where St. Patrick's
That's
Cathedral
right,
is. They think it's at 50th Street and Fifth Avenue.
Yeah.
But actually, the original St. Patrick's Cathedral is on Prince Street between Mott and Mulberry.
Oh, interesting.
And it's frankly almost as large as the one on Fifth Avenue, and it's still there. They owned, among other things, a number of buildings nearby that the diocese did,
Okay.
including an old parochial school, the oldest parochial school, I think, in the country.
Wow.
But they had closed it, and so these buildings were surplus to them, and they wanted to sell them. But there were beautiful old historic buildings right opposite the cathedral, so we thought it would make a great renovation project, and it did. And so we did that after 50 West. But as things go, the phone rang, and I had partnered with a family called Carlick
JK Equities.
JK Equities, which is essentially Jerry and his son Jordan, in the renovation of a loft building in Chicago. I don't remember what year, but
That's okay. Yeah.
say 2015 or something. And we completed it, and it went very, very well, and very successful project. Anyway, Jerry calls me and says, "Oh, he's got this building on 1000M, or on South Michigan,
Yep.
that he thinks we should buy." And I said, "Well, tell me about it." And he tells me, "Well, it's a 8-story building, and it has it's right on Michigan Avenue. It's the best street in Chicago."
Right.
And he thinks it has good potential. Plus, it has air rights that somebody who would buy the empty parking lot next door would need to develop that property, as well as it had some rear access that would also be critical. So anybody who wanted to buy the property next door would have to deal with us in Jerry's estimation. So we thought that gave us an edge. Meanwhile, the price of the property was more than it would have been without it, so it wasn't like we were getting this
A great deal.
extra thing for free. And it just sounded speculative to me. We're overpaying for the property in order to hope that at some point the guy next door, who wasn't a guy, that was a bank, there had been an unsuccessful attempt to develop the property previously, and it ended up owned by a bank. And I just said, Jerry, it's not really my thing. And he said, "Oh, but it's such a good location." I said, "Look, if you want, track down the owner of the bank that's taken over the property next door, and maybe if they want to sell it, then we could use the air rights ourselves, and then the whole thing might make more sense to me."
Right.
So Jerry and his son Jordan did that. They tracked the bank down, and the bank was in a mind to sell it because they didn't want it. And we ended up entering into a favorable deal with them. Also gave us enough time to make sure that the city would be okay with what building we were proposing, get our approvals and all of that sort of thing.
Okay.
And so even though it wasn't what I had expected to be doing at that particular moment, there I was
Yeah.
at it again.
Did that cycle happen pretty quickly from initial proposal of, hey, we should buy this, to the bank willing to come to the table, and then?
It wasn't, I can't remember. It wasn't a long time, but it might have been 6 months or
Yeah.
it wasn't.
Too short, too long. Right.
It wasn't too long. It was sort of.
In the initial, as frame for the project, so right now it's 74 stories, 738 apartments.
Correct.
It's a fantastic building. Originally, it was a condo project, at least from what I've read, maybe.
That is correct.
Okay.
Originally, we thought of it as a condo project.
So I think there was 520 proposed condos. This project,
420.
420 condos, lived through COVID. So this changed. Goldman pulled their loan, it seemed like. So let's get into acquiring. I guess before we talk about the evolution of the deal, who came to the table to start? Was it just you and JK Equities? There was a third team as well, Oak Capital, maybe, that was involved?
No, Oak Capital is really part of Jerry's group.
Okay.
They're traditional partners together.
Got it.
So Jerry, on behalf of himself and his partners, Oak Capital, came and said, okay, now that we've gotten the right to buy the property next door, subject to getting these approvals,
Got it.
we should go ahead and buy 1006, which is the building next door that had the air rights. And so we moved ahead and did that and continued with our approval process to put the whole thing together. 1006, we just bought with a traditional mortgage on it, not a construction loan, because it was rent. There were tenant. It was a loft office building also, and I can't remember how occupied it was. It wasn't full, but maybe 80% occupied.
Got it. So what was the evolution from there? So acquire the site. What was the construction process? And then I guess let's walk through the COVID process where the project really shifted gears a lot.
Right. So in the beginning, we had this vision of a condo project, and Chicago's leading condo marketing organization had told us that they thought they could achieve certain pricing that would make the thing worthwhile and make the economics work. And the first thing we did in the ground floor of the building next door, which we owned, we put our sales office.
Okay, cool.
And of course, you could look out and see the park and see the lake, exactly what we were going to sell next door.
Beautiful.
And we built a fantastic sales office for a lot of money, several $1 million. And we began pre-sales. And we have, of course, we're having the architects prepare all the plans. We're getting all the estimates, everything put together. And we had a loan from Goldman that was a two-phase loan. The first phase would be for the planning and for the foundation.
Okay.
And then the second phase was going to be for the building and the rest of the building. But the terms of that second phase had not been finalized. And anyway, as we're going along in our sales, the marketing company had said that they wanted some of the sales on the lowest floors to be at low pricing and then the upper floors would be at higher pricing. So I forget what, maybe the lower floors could have been at about $650 a foot, and the upper floors maybe as high as $1,400 a foot.
Wow.
So there was a big difference. But of course, some of the lower floors didn't face the park. And blah, blah. And what we noticed is we got a good sales reaction right away, but people were buying the low-priced apartments and not the high-priced apartments. So we were having a very brisk sale on the lowest price apartments, but that was essentially at our break-even point. We weren't making any margin there. And unless we could sell some of the higher floors, we would have a problem. Mm-hmm. And we sold about 100 of the 400 units, although the last group was, at a certain point, we adjusted the plans to create some micro units.
Interesting. Okay.
So we became aware that there might be a market for people to buy apartments of 500 square feet.
And was that an adjustment because the smaller units were selling better than the larger?
Yes,
okay.
Partially, but those, the micro units were on the higher floors, and those were being priced at about $1,000 a foot. So the price point was good, and so we went through, and those were selling. And so we were proceeding along, and Goldman was acting like, okay, we're going to now discuss phase 2, and everything was proceeding along. And then, of course, you all know what happened. COVID came along. Right. And so we were just in the early foundation stage. And, you know, we're all trying to figure out what COVID means. Construction rules were changing daily.
Wow.
And one of the next phases of what we would have had to do at 1,000 M was what we call the mat pour. This is where you pour the foundation, the base of the building.
Okay.
And it's a huge effort, and it requires a lot of people, a lot of tradesmen on the site. And at that point, the city was saying, well, you can have workmen on the site, but they have to be separated by 10 feet, which wouldn't have been part. And nobody knew exactly what things were going to, they were changing daily.
Of course.
And I just said, and meanwhile, Goldman was saying, well, we don't know, pandemic, what's that? We were all saying, what's that? And they started to get squeamish. Yeah. And I could read the tea leaves. So even though they didn't say they were backing out, I knew.
You backed out for them, almost, it sounds like.
Finally, I said, you know what? Let's get through this thing. Let's close the site down, and let's see what happens. And so that was probably March of 20. Mm-hmm. And by the summer of 20, of course, all of us were in sequestering wherever we were. Right. But we were all doing Zooms 24/7. Mm-hmm. Rather than working less, we were working more. We were just working from different locations. But it became clearer and clearer that Goldman was not going to move forward at this time. You know, never formally, but it was clear. Yeah. Meanwhile, Rob, who's very good at adapting, is getting feedback about that the luxury market is rental market is pricing itself at new highs. And he begins to discuss creating an alternative path. Of course, we're also aware of the pricing issue on the units
Higher
that we've been selling, that we're not seeing the kind of, we're losing confidence that we're going to achieve the average price that was critical to us. Probably, for, I don't remember the exact number, but maybe 900 average might have been
That makes
our
sense.
sweet spot. And, we're looking, even with the micro units, maybe on the square footage basis, we were averaging 700 or something on what we had sold. So we're really missing those larger, expensive upper floor apartments.
Yeah.
There are people looking at them. We sold a couple, but we weren't getting a warm and fuzzy.
So is sales and marketing still going on even though the construction lending portion has paused during that summer? Or people, it's sales and marketing? I guess it's all
yes,
remote.
but we're recalibrating.
Okay.
And Rob is busy with the architects saying, okay, let's look at an alternative scheme here. What if we went all rental, because he's got this rental marketing group who says, rents in fully amenitized, well-located buildings have broken $4, and previously, maybe you would have thought $3.
Yeah.
And they were predicting a strong
Demand.
demand,
Yeah.
and they were reporting, even in the middle of COVID, that their other buildings were fully occupied, et cetera, et cetera. So, reading the tea leaves, Rob goes into full mode on a possible redesign. Initially, we're saying, well, we'll just keep these two paths going, and then when the COVID thing lifts, we'll figure out whether we're going right or left. But somewhere along the line, we decided to go left instead of right. And at that point, we let all the buyers know that we were changing the plan, and we returned all their deposits. And then we went full mode into a rental plan where we shrunk the units
That's
and
right.
increased the number. So we went from 420 condos to 738 rental apartments, but it was exactly the same building.
Wow.
The building didn't change at all.
Was it hard to resubmit plans to get approval based on
Yes.
layout?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
One thing so well, you just change a few lines on the drawer. We took $6 million worth of plans, ripped them up, threw them in the garbage, and
Created 6 million more.
started again.
Wow.
In addition to which, we had to get approved by the city because we were going from 420 to 738 units.
So density.
So
Issue.
it was a density issue, and that became a little bit more of a challenge than we had anticipated, particularly to get local buy-in from what they call the aldermen of our area, although it happened to be an older woman. I don't know why they call it an older man, but that's
So
what
be
it
it.
is.
Yeah.
Anyway, and she had a lot of questions and was looking at this because it had previously been approved by her predecessor. So she didn't have the same
okay.
commitment to the project that her predecessor did. And since she had the opportunity now to re-examine it, she had a number of concerns and a list of wants.
Sure.
And so that was a rigorous process until we were finally able to get city approval, which we got in the end, of course. And then we went into, and by that time, it was a new day. I guess it was sometime in 21. We were able to document to Goldman, who was still the lender on the foundation and had never closed the door, that this was a good new plan. It was easier because
It was an income product now?
it was an income product, and condo sales always are. The condo market is fickle, you know.
Absolutely.
It's there one day, gone the next, and you have to be right there, and you have to execute in the moment. And in Chicago, it was particularly fickle.
Why so?
Just had a long history. New York has a much deeper co-op and condo market than Chicago does. And, you know, there have been a lot of condo projects in Chicago that faltered and had difficult times. Some of them related to people in government that we know. Some of them were successful, but it's not an easy market from that point of view. Rentals are generally easier to predict,
Right.
although not infallible.
Sure.
So that was easier for Goldman to wrap their heads around, and they did, and eventually they approved the project from their point of view, but they only wanted to put up 200 of the 300 million that we needed, which meant we had to get another lender to come up with the other 100 million. And those weren't easy times
Certainly not.
to find lenders. And Chicago, frankly, good news and bad news is that it wasn't a market that every lender was willing to lend in.
Why so? Well, this was during COVID, so a lot of people were kind of leaving cities a little bit?
This was
or
post-COVID.
post-COVID?
You know, Chicago had a history of difficult circumstances, crime rates,
Politics.
all kinds of things, and so there were lenders who said, "Well, Chicago's not one of our lending environments." So that's bad when you're trying to get project financing.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it's good because it means that your competition is going to be reduced. So if you do make it through the gate, it's not like you're one of 100. You know, you might be one of 6 or 10.
Where did that capital stack end up at? So there was a senior debt position by Goldman. When I was on with David, I think he may have mentioned the 1031 platform may have played a role, and potentially there was a land lease. He didn't give too much sugar away with it, so feel free not to spoil, but what did that end up looking like? It seemed creative.
So in the end, we had a $300 million loan, and in the end, the partner lender was Deutsche Bank.
Okay.
So Deutsche and Goldman provided $305 million, which was a traditional construction loan. But even at when I say traditional construction loan, this was a loan that came out of what they regard as their private bank, as opposed to the commercial bank. And the private bank, which exists in a number of large banks, tend to rely more on relationships as a criteria for their loans than the commercial bank. Commercial bank is just sort of hard and fast on the
numbers
and on other criteria. The private bank will give more weight to the borrower, their financial profile, and the amount of guarantees that borrower is willing to provide. And because we were willing to provide significant guarantees, that made it possible for the private bank. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't take a lot of interest in what you're doing.
Of course.
They certainly do, and they put you through all the same scrutiny. But whereas the commercial bank has its policies, the private bank has different criteria. And then the rest of then the question was, are we going to get preferred equity? We're going to go to a traditional preferred equity source where money is expensive,
Very.
very expensive. And frankly, for a rental project, it's really hard to justify unless you're a merchant builder and you're going to sell it right away.
Right, that would make sense.
But that wasn't our plan. And so David, who runs our equity department, had been telling us that he had a lot of demand for what we call 1031 investments, or investments that people who are selling a building could reinvest their sale proceeds into. And so we came up with a unique structure which allowed people normally to do a 1031 into a to-be-built site is almost impossible.
Wow.
Because the time frame that tax law allows you to complete the building, forget what it is, it's maybe 18 months.
Right.
But you can't build a 73-story building in 18 months. It takes longer than that. So it's difficult to figure out how to do it technically. But we came up with a way through a land lease.
Brilliant.
And that worked well, and investors were receptive. Investors don't often get a chance to invest in a building of this quality. It's unusual.
Of course.
So they were excited by that opportunity, and their investment was priced attractively, certainly relative to, from our point of view, from mezzanine financing. So they would get a certain base return, which we were paying them, and then they had a participation in the eventual profits of the building. So it worked well for them. It was more secure than, for various reasons, than a normal one. It was a product that the market liked, and so we were able to avoid having a traditional preferred equity structure and utilize that as an alternative. And then, of course, traditional equity,
right,
which we provided. And that's the capital stack.
So how does the project progress and then finish? So after 21, do things get a little bit easier? Like it seems to be built, and then it was complete, just for reference, I think, last summer.
We completed last May.
Okay, right.
That was when we began occupancy last May. And in terms of our construction, with the exception of one problem, it was pretty much as good as it could possibly be. Our construction management company, McHugh, is known as the best in Chicago. They executed flawlessly. So we did not have a lot of the problems that often occur. We had also planned it very, very well. We had made sure that before we began, we had a fully priced job with a GMP, gross maximum price, so that any slippage would be highly manageable and contained, and in fact, we had no slippage. We completed on time, on budget.
Hard to do.
Which is, frankly, I think our bankers and everybody involved was astonished because, and I mean, let's be real. There's a lot of luck involved here because things that you can't predict could have happened. But in this case, they didn't happen. So that became a great victory for us. Leasing has also gone extremely well. We started occupying last May. 500 of the 738 apartments are occupied as we speak. And we expect to be, with the current leasing pace, if things continue as they are, to be fully leased by the end of the year.
Wow.
Which is actually ahead of our original schedule. So we're feeling pretty good about it. The one thing that didn't go the way we had hoped was, you guessed it, interest rates.
That's right.
Interest rates went way up during this time. And there again, we were a little bit lucky, not 100% lucky, but pretty lucky. At a certain point, I decided, to buy a rate cap, saying that if rates went above, I forget where they were when we started, they might have been sub 100.
That's right.
And I said, okay, well, let's price all kinds of different rate caps, because, there are a million different rate caps you can buy. You can buy them for different time periods. You can buy them at different interest rates. They're like an insurance policy, where the insurance policy, if rates go above a certain amount the insurance company pays you whatever the extra cost, the delta cost would be. So, but of course they cost money and they're expensive. We hadn't, originally everybody was living in the magic land of low rates, and they had been low for a long time. So a lot of people just took the risk. But I was a little uneasy with that, or very uneasy. So we began pricing different possible approaches, and we took an approach where we knew we had some room in our interest rate reserves. But I said, well, I certainly don't want to go beyond those reserves. What do we have to do to protect ourselves and stay on budget? And what that meant was, in the beginning of a construction loan, you actually aren't borrowing that much money because you've just started construction. You always have to spend your equity commitment first, which, in this case was $150 million or something.
Pretty significant, yeah.
So a lot of the early construction is being paid for out of the equity. So you can be well advanced in a job before you start drawing money, and then in the beginning you're at zero.
Yeah.
Or in this case, 40 million, because that was the foundation. Anyway, so we figured out that for the first 18 months we were going to be okay. But after 18 months, if rates went up, we could have a budget problem, and we didn't want to go there. So we ended up buying a rate cap to protect us for the time of balance of construction, when we had the most money borrowed, and for the rent-up period. And as it happens, that took us through April, or this month, I think. Or April, I guess.
So that certainly paid dividends through these massive rate hikes.
Frankly, I think we paid $2 million for the cap, and I think it's valued at 12. I think we will have collected probably $12 million back.
Wow.
So that was a very, very important ingredient, key decision in this transaction, and I know other developer friends who didn't make that decision, and it's been very painful.
I bet. Anything else? A couple kind of wrap-up questions coming up for you, but the project's gone well so far. It's, like you said, almost through lease-up. Anything else 1000M related, do you think, that we missed about that project?
Well,
maybe we missed a lot, but anything that you wanted to highlight, I would say.
It's an incredibly beautiful. The aesthetics of the building are outstanding.
Mm-hmm.
The amenities are a step beyond what anybody else had done. The building is regarded now as probably the top residential building in Chicago. So we weren't building a standard project. Mm-hmm. We were really building something of exceptional building of iconic potential, and it seems to be realizing that.
I would say so. So in lightly wrapping up, there's so many moments in your career. I would encourage anyone to read the book. It's phenomenal. But in looking back, what kind of twofold, what do you think was the most challenging, excluding these two projects, what do you think was the most challenging project or time period for you as the entrepreneur, as someone sweating out these deals that go one way or the other oftentimes? What do you think the most...
Well, there's certainly been many of them.
Yeah, pure pain periods, just business related, that is. What do you think?
Clearly, the most painful period was 1988 through 88 to 95. But in 1988 or 1987, the U.S. passed a tax reform which redefined the value of real estate. Because prior to that point, there had been a segment of the value of every property which was strictly due to its tax benefits. Mm. And the Tax Act of '86, which came into existence in '87, probably reduced the value of most properties at least 20 or 30%. Oh my God. So what happened was most equity during that period, a lot of it got wiped out. And it was so bad that it had many banks who, in that period, banks were lending very high percentages of loan to value. They got affected, which led to what everybody who's been part of that period knows as the savings and loan crisis. I think 2,000 U.S. banks were closed between 1988 and 1990. So it was like a financial war. Yeah. 8 or 9 of the largest real estate companies in the country went bankrupt. BK, all the way. It was a terribly difficult time. And we had our share of that. And, frankly, I didn't know from 1988, 89 till sometime in the early 90s whether we were going to survive.
What was day-to-day like then for you? Is it just waking up and getting emails or phone calls of bad news day after day?
Day-to-day was dealing with bankers, and you weren't even dealing with the bankers anymore. You were dealing with the U.S. government because they closed all the banks.
Right.
And so it was being run by the RTC, which was, I think, will stand for the Restoration Trust Company. It's essentially the government agency that took over all the closed banks. And, often there was nobody home. You just didn't know what was happening. And it was turmoil. Wow. Absolute turmoil. And I would have given ourselves a 1 out of 20 chance of surviving. Somehow we did. How, I can't tell you, but it was not a happy period.
Wow. Last couple for you, Francis. So you've been a part of so many different market periods. We've covered a big one there, and we covered the 2008. But you've also been a part of so many different markets, which we spoke about a couple today, and overseas markets, and then asset classes as well. Is there any product, project, market that you haven't been a part of, or development that you would like to in the future?
I think I've owned several hotels and decided that that's a different business than the investment, is the kind of real estate business that
More of an operating business, or?
It's more of an operating business. So we sold our hotel interests, and that's not of interest. In terms of, I think it's less about new product types. I mean, we always have an open mind, always interested in new things. But there aren't that many new types. I mean,
That's right.
And I mean, you might look at data centers as probably
Yeah.
the newest type. And we've taken a look at that, although I think that market, there were some earlier people in that market, and I know some of them. And it's now, used to be the deals were large. Now deals are often in the billions because the data centers are so. So I don't think it's an area that we'll be jumping into.
Sure.
It's more adapting within the existing types that we're familiar with. Clearly, we're going through a period of rethinking office buildings, and there's probably a surplus in the country. It's market by market. Some markets are strong, some markets are not. But there's a lot of office buildings that need to be retooled into other uses, primarily residential. So that's an area that we're involved in to some degree or another. And I really think it's adapting as markets changed. That's more likely to be the kind of challenges we'll take on, as opposed to something brand new, although
Who knows?
Who knows? And, if I had understood data centers earlier, I might well have gotten involved.
What are you focused on now inside the company, and where do you think your future is or focus? Do you think your responsibilities are going to change? Is there going to be a changing of the guard at some point, or like what are you? Twofold question. What's the evolution of your focus going to be here? And then two, what still excites you every day about deal making and being a part of the real estate business, do you think?
Well, actually, A and B are in a way the same.
Okay, yeah.
So I'm very lucky. I had a whole generation of senior leaders in the company who came on with me in the 80s as the company was growing, and they stuck around. One of them's retiring actually this week. He's been here 39 years. However, fortunately, 15 or 20 years ago, I understood the passage of time and was able to attract a group of young potential leaders who have now, and so there's a whole group of 40-something-year-olds or late 30s, early 40s, each of who've been here 15 or 20 years, and they're the real leaders of the company.
That makes sense.
The director of our development department, or you can go right down the line. They all have a similar role. They're similar age, and they've been here for 15 or 20 years. Yeah. So it's not like...
They have the Kool-Aid. Yeah.
So, and they're fantastic. I mean, each one of them are leaders in their own right. You know, David Becker, who runs the equity department, similar. So my challenge is to make sure that they're challenged, and of course, if you have very talented people that you work with, they've got to see the ability to realize themselves. So in a way, even if I was ready to take a nap, I can't take a nap if I want to have this kind of dynamic talent associated with me, which I do. And so what gets me up every day is that I know that I have these terrific folks who I work with, my colleagues, who call them the young senior leaders or whatever, they're really the engines of the business. And every one of them is, they're about, I don't know how many, 7, 8, 9, who lead all the key
Groups,
departments in the company, and each one of them are top in their field. So that's a very exciting environment to be part of, and I plan to stick around. I go to the country on Thursday afternoons. Of course, I have a long work day by Zoom on Friday, and then a few calls on Saturday and Sunday.
Yep.
I travel a lot, but as most of us have, I've learned to be a virtual office. So whether I'm in Portugal or
That's right.
Ireland next week, you'll be sure
Still
that
working.
business is continue to going on here, and whatever input they need from me, they'll get.
That's right. Last question, and if you have anything that you wanted to finish with, anything, we can certainly touch on that. But when I sat in here the first time I met you, I think I asked you a different rendition of this question, but who do you think helped you the most in your career as it pertains to really learning the real estate business? You talked about some greats in the book, like Larry Tisch or your friend Charlie Benenson, I think, and a slew of others. But who do you think was really fundamental?
I think for me, Charlie Benenson was definitely the most impactful and the one I was closest to. I entered into a transaction with, Charlie was partners with Harry Helmsley, who's another famous New York real estate icon. And Charlie didn't like the way Harry was managing the building. And at that time, New York had a special tax on real estate sales, which Charlie didn't want to pay. So he decided that they should lease the building to somebody besides, so that Harry and he were friends. They didn't want to fight over it or have disagreements. Lease it to somebody else, and that's where I came in. And they leased me what was a large midtown office building, and that's how I met Charlie. And we liked each other. We met in the course of the negotiations. We liked each other, and we began having lunches together probably, let's say, every 2 or 3 months for the next 30 years.
Wow.
Or until Charlie died.
What did you talk about at lunch? Did you just ask him tons of questions, or what was your relationship over time?
It was reciprocal. Charlie, who had an ongoing big real estate portfolio himself, but he was less active doing new things. He was, to some degree, he had converted a lot of his holdings into net lease positions, and he was busy collecting checks, a lot of them. And he was also an art collector and very philanthropic. And all that rubbed off on me. But he liked real estate entrepreneurs tend to be, to one level or another, deal junkies. So he liked to hear about all the things that I was doing.
Yeah.
So he would ask me, and I would tell him about it. Or and then sometimes we would explore a transaction together. I'd tell him, oh well, I've got this, that, and he would say, well, that sounds interesting. Let's go see Larry. So that was
It's a crazy story. Yeah.
Larry Tisch, and see what Larry thinks, because he had some interest. Or let's go see some other icon in the real estate business. Let's go see Fred Rose and see what Fred thinks. And so Charlie not only brought me his own endless experience and wisdom, but he also brought me access to all of the smartest people in the real estate business. And he was just a great friend. Sometimes we talk about art. Sometimes we talk about philanthropy. He usually liked me to make a donation to different philanthropies that he was interested in. Eventually, I did the reverse with him, and he was always generous. So it was really a pivotal relationship for me, and informed my path. And I was lucky, and I touched on it in the book. I had a number of mentors, some real estate oriented, some non-real estate, who were really the people who I learned the most from, even beyond my business school formal education. And so when I talk to young people, I always tell them, if you see somebody around that you have good chemistry with, that you respect, try to spend a little time with them.
Yeah. That's why we're here today. That's why I'm here today.
Incidentally, one thing I do want to mention, you're kind enough to talk about risk game, but just so you know, I have finished a new book, which will be published in August or September.
Wow.
And it's really about the building of the 1000M, which we've been talking about. And it's called Autobiography of a Skyscraper.
Beautiful.
And it's not just my story as a developer. I and my co-writer, the same person who worked on Risk Game with me, has spent throughout the 1000M development, she interviewed all the design professionals, all of the city planners, the construction people, the tradesmen who worked on the building. She would go up on the deck continuously, the marketing people, everybody who comes together to make one of these projects happen, including a few of the residents after they moved in. So it really tells the story from beginning to end. And my hope is that people who are learning how to be involved in projects of this scope, that this will sort of give them an exposure to the village that it really takes to build one of these things. Because, there are probably 500 or probably 1,000 people who've been involved in one level or another in a project of that size and scope. It doesn't happen, or 2, 3 people or 10 people.
Of course. So that will come out in September, you said?
Yes.
Yeah. Is there anything else we missed about? I know we missed a lot about your story, so hopefully we can do it another time too. But is there anything we missed in this conversation that you wanted to close with, whether it be your future, anything Time Equities related that you wanted to touch on?
No, I think, I'm sure, there's, as you point out, lots of other transactions, lots of other things that are going on. Maybe I'll just share one thing, because my first step into international real estate, which is not something that everybody thinks about or even thinks is possible.
Right.
Because we get so conditioned to think about ourselves as having local expertise. And my earliest connection with anything international, even though some Americans think that Canada is part of the U.S., Canadians don't think that, I assure you. And in fact, in Quebec, the largest part of Canada, they don't even speak English.
Right.
So I entered into the Canadian market in the mid-'90s, which was a real good experience because it did have all of the elements that international real estate involves. And that then led me to have the ambition and the openness to go into Germany and more recently Holland, Scotland, and a variety of other markets. So I guess that real estate skills are actually more portable than we think. And so that's just a thought to share with you.
Yeah. I love it. And I think maybe your positive sentiment towards Canada came from you bought a building from the Bronfman family for like $6 a square foot or
That's
something.
correct.
Pretty
That
cheap.
that is correct.
So you started off on the right foot. Francis, I think that's a good place to wrap up. Thank you so much for having me in the
My
office.
pleasure, and
coming
thank
on
you
the show.
for coming back and asking for another discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you.